Okay, hello everyone. It's weird. I have a mixed audience. We have live folks and Zoom folks. So to prevent awkwardness, I'm probably just going to be addressing folks in the room. So if I'm not looking at the camera, that's why. So hello. Yes, everyone can. Yes. So this is like I said, it's a hybrid. We're doing in person and Zoom. If folks have questions, put it in the chat, and our moderator will ask me. Where do we begin over here? So yeah, my name is Akiva Leader. I'm an employee at Coinbase. So I've been kind of dealing with Bitcoin and Bitcoin related stuff for a few years now. There's a nice disclaimer slide, but I'll tell you twice, right? Nothing here is to be taken as legal or financial advice. This is just my opinion. It does not reflect the opinion of my employer or the Kollel. Or anyone else for that matter. But this should, disclaimer aside, this should be really educational. It's really about educational. Hopefully there's some entertainment value as well. But it's just to learn. And there's a lot of stuff that we're going to cover that's at a very high level, and I'm breezing through this. There's probably like several college courses worth of material that we're going to go through in half an hour. So don't expect everyone to like grasp all of this. This really is meant to be an introduction to a very complicated topic. So I think we're good to go. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. The title of this talk is the moral case for Bitcoin. I'm doing the first part of the presentation. Rabbi Rimmer is going to follow up with his portion of the talk. I'm really going to mostly kind of give a broad introduction, really starting out with just what is money, right? Because that's a complicated topic in and of itself. And to really kind of get into the weeds, we have to understand what is money. And a lot of times we don't really think about that, right? Let's minimize that. How's that? Okay. Okay, here's the disclaimer. I said at the beginning, not legal investment advice. I don't represent my employer. This is just me. This is me talking. Okay. So like I said, what is money? What is money? It's a complicated topic. I found a great quote from Yuval Noah Harari. He's a big thought leader based in Jerusalem. And he said, money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. I think that's a pretty cool definition because it covers throughout history what money is, was, and what it could be. And it really is just it's a way of trusting that I have value that I want to exchange with someone else, right? And I'm trusting that at the time of the transaction down the road, they are going to honor that. I would also, if I were to augment this a little bit, I would say that there's a technological component to it, right? Maybe at the very beginning of time, it was kind of just you kept in their head, he owes me some wheat or whatever. But the second we started like putting that down onto physical media, whether it was clay, cuneiform tablets or coins or whatever, that is technology, right? That is technology in the works. And as we'll see with Bitcoin, is kind of the ultimate evolution of that. So it is this quote, and it is more. And so here, we'll get into it later, but this is probably what folks think of when they think of money, right? You open your wallet, that's what you see. But let's go further. What can be used as money? This is kind of fascinating because really, if you go back to that quote, anything can be used as money as long as the people you're interacting with trust that it is money. So here's some examples just through history. This is a rye stone, which is a giant stone that was used by money in folks in the Polynesian islands. These are glass beads. I think these are like animal teeth. Here's a gold coin, an ancient one. This one is, again, recognizable. It's a US dollar. This one actually is salt, which is very interesting because salt for a long time was used as money. And in fact, the word salary comes from salt. The Roman legions were paid in salt. So you get phrases like, are you worth your salt, and things like that. And so salt can be used as money. You get into stories of World War II or whatever, POW camps, they used cigarettes as money, right? Cigarettes, money. Okay. Anything can be used as money. But what you want to understand is like, what are the properties of money, right? When you break it down, like what makes money money? So there's three main properties. The first one is a medium of exchange. I think that's kind of the most obvious to folks. I give you $1, you're going to give me whatever in exchange for that. We are doing an exchange, right? Before money, you're kind of limited to barter, right? Where you hope that Maybe I'm a shoemaker, you're a baker. You hope that the baker wants my shoes, right? But no, that won't happen all the time. So you want something that is a medium of exchange. But then beyond that, you want something that is going to store value. So things that are perishable, like oranges, probably don't make good money because a year from now, they're not going to exist. The cigarettes in the POW camp might, right? The cigarette might hold together or whatever. Then you get something a bit more permanent like gold. Gold's never going to corrode. It's always going to be there. So it makes pretty good money for the storing of the value. And then unit of account, it's a fancy thing, but it just means the prices that are quoted in. So you go to Fred Meyer, what are they quoting you? They're quoting you in US dollars, right? They're not quoting you in grams of gold. That's not useful. They're quoting it in US dollars. And so obviously it's going to change based on jurisdiction. If you're watching this from a country that's not the United States, it's not going to be US dollars necessarily. It might be something else. So you add all those three things together. Those are the basic properties of money. But then we can go deeper. We can say, okay, a lot of things can suffice that requirement, right? Cigarettes, oranges, dollars. But what is good money? What makes money good, quote unquote good? And this is not like a moral judgment right now, right? This is just the practical properties of it. So I'll go through this list. Again, you don't need to memorize this. This is just, each one of these things could be an essay in and of itself, right? So fungibility. The units are interchangeable, right? If I'm going to pay with the dollar, it doesn't matter which dollar I use, they're all the same, right? They have different serial numbers, but we don't care which particular dollar you give me. Durability, right? The ability to withstand repeated use. So coins are great. They degrade slowly over time. Dollars are less so, right? They get tattered, they get broken. So you want something that is durable. And going back to the example of oranges, those are terrible because not only are they not durable, but they're going to rot, right? They're not going to be good for a long time. Divisibility. So this is the idea of, can I chop it up into smaller units? Salt is great back in the day, right? Because I can just give you a smaller amount of salt. Cigarettes are hard. I can't chop up the cigarette. It loses the quality of it being a cigarette. Oranges are also hard, right? I chop it up, not so good. Dollars, we have different units, right? We can divide a dollar. We have a $10 bill, $1 bill, whatever. So that's fine. And we can kind of play that game with anything. Portability. How easy is it to transfer and carry? Gold is heavy. It's not really useful if I have to carry around my gold everywhere I'm going. That's a drag, right? Dollar bills are very light. I can pack a lot of them into my wallet, so that's pretty nice. A credit card is even lighter, right? Just one credit card and can access all sorts of money. Identifiability. So if I present someone with the dollar bill, do they immediately recognize that, oh, that's a dollar bill, I can take that as money? That's important. If you're in a situation where someone actually has to inspect, is this money, like that's going to impede on the transaction. Not going to be a good thing. Acceptability. So it's kind of like the identifiability. Will they accept it? If I go to Fred Meyer and I hand him the $10 bill, like I'm pretty confident they're going to accept it. So there's times where they change the format of the dollars. Like I remember when they revamped the 20 and it was like brand new, and I would go with a brand new $20 bill. And the first time a cashier saw it, they actually weren't sure to accept it. They didn't know that the dollars had changed. And those are interesting moments where you run into this. You're like, no, I swear the ATM gave it to me. This is our money now, right? Those are fun. Uniformity. So this one's, it's kind of a little nit here. The units of the same denomination have the same purchasing power. So every $5 bill is equivalent, right? There's no one $5 bill that's better, right? This $5 bill is worth $5.05. No, they're all the same.
I think it is a money changer because I bet I've traded for a $5 bill than a $1 bill.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's not a country.
Yeah. So the internationally, there's all sorts of quirks there. So they'd rather have a $100 bill in most countries than a smaller unit, right? And beyond that, they want a crisp one, right? So there's other quirks too. And then constrained supply. So this one will become more important when we get into Bitcoin and other forms of money. How hard is it to create new money, right? Can I just print it from my home computer? Or does it have to be printed by the Federal Reserve and they put all sorts of watermarks and other things to make it so that you can't just make a lot of them? So historically, you get these stories of cultures that use glass beads, for example, as money. And then the Europeans come in and they have a factory that can pump this stuff out, and it crashes their economy real quick. When the Europeans come in with all these beads, it costs them nothing to make this stuff. So historically, that's a very important part of money. How hard is it to create new money? Okay, so there's this concept of fiat money. It's important. A lot of people may or may not have heard this term before. Rabbi Rimmer is going to mention it down the road. So I just want to put that out there for definitional points. So what is fiat money? What does fiat mean? It comes from the Latin word decree, order, authorization. It basically says some power saying this is money, right? Because I have power, I'm saying this is money. And if you're in my jurisdiction, you're probably going to accept that it is money. There are different types of fiat money, but basically every country in the world today uses some version of fiat money, right? It is the money because they say it's the money. And most people say, okay, it's the money. There's some quirks there, like the concept of it being redeemable or irredeemable. Under a gold standard, without getting too much into the history here, but there used to be a time where your US dollars, you could actually go to the Federal Reserve and swap it for the equivalent in gold. That meant that it was redeemable for gold, right? Again, you don't want to carry around gold because it's heavy and you go to Fred Meyer and they're not going to accept the gold, but I could go take my dollar and swap it for gold. It's no longer the case. Sorry to break bad news to everyone. Since 1971, President Nixon closed what was called the gold window, and since that date, around that time, dollars are no longer redeemable for gold. So, you know, they're not quote unquote backed by anything other than the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, and that's what we mean when we say fiat money, right? Is the force, the power of the government. Some people would say it's backed by, you know, an army and some guns. Maybe, yeah, there's some truth to that, and that's a whole nother discussion. But the concept of fiat money, that when we say fiat money, we're really talking about government issued money, basically. And here's some nice examples down here that we.
Is there any legal standard in the world?
Not anymore. I think the Swiss were the latest to go off of it, but there's a lot of reasons. It's almost like if no one else is doing it, why am I still doing it? And so you don't need to. Now, it's not like they're backed by nothing. Like central banks around the world do hold like large deposits of gold, and actually most of their deposits are reserves of other countries' currencies. So it's not like there's nothing backing it, but it's not redeemable, right? So I can't go and say, hey, here's my $10, Federal Reserve, please give me $10 worth of gold. So that's an interesting point.
We used to be able to get $35.
We as in South Africa.
No, US citizens.
Yeah, US citizens, yeah.
Before it was abandoned, we could get gold. The gold price was $35 an ounce. So you could redeem for that value.
Yeah. Whole nother, I mean, again, that's a whole nother fascinating topic, but we don't have time. So we're going to move along. So now we're going to get into the Bitcoin portion. I'm going to read to you a definition that came from the bitcoin.org website. You don't need to understand this. This is, again, very complicated, but I'm going to read it just so we can kind of get an understanding. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a consensus network that enables a new payment system and a completely digital money. It is the first decentralized peer-to-peer payment network that is powered by its users with no central authority or middleman. From a user perspective, Bitcoin is pretty much like cash for the internet. Bitcoin can also be seen as the most prominent triple entry bookkeeping system in existence. So there's a lot there in those few sentences, whole lot, right? So I tried to highlight some words there that I thought were important. Bitcoin, you might see it, this is a little technical, but when it's written with the big B, usually that refers to Bitcoin, the network, the network itself. And the little b actually refers to the coins, right? Or the digital versions of what we would call coins, because they are digital. They don't actually exist in real life, right? It's like, where's your email? Well, you could print it out, but the email itself is digital, right? So it's a network. A consensus is just a fancy word for meaning the computers running the network, they come to an agreement on the state of the network. So every 10 minutes, the network updates and all the computers agree, yes, this is the current state of the network. It says how much he owns, how much she owns, and we're all in agreement. Digital money, that is an interesting thing. Digital money has been tried in the past. There were a lot of attempts in the 90s, and pretty much they failed because of a double spend problem, right? If you think of like MP3s, it's trivially easy to make 1 million copies of an MP3 with perfect fidelity, right? So again, back to the properties of good money, you want it to be difficult to make new money. If it's just a digital file and I could, copy and save and make an unlimited amount of it, it's not going to work. So some of the early attempts tried to get around that by making a centralized server company or whatever, saying, okay, this centralization, this service is going to be in charge of saying who owns what, right? So they can't create it out of thin air. But the problem with that is there's a bunch of problems with it, but the number one is you have to trust this central authority. And what happens if the government, where that's the jurisdiction of where that central authority resides, the government doesn't like what they're doing and they come in and shut it down or whatever. So that's the idea of it being decentralized and peer-to-peer, right? So I can connect and send Bitcoin to anyone. It doesn't have to go through a centralized service like a PayPal or Venmo or Bank of America or something like that. And then from the user perspective, Bitcoin is like cash for the internet, right? We're used to transacting and sending information online, but we're not used to sending value, right? We're still getting used to this concept of what is digital value. How do you have digital value? And so if I want to sum up Bitcoin in 2 words, I call it digital scarcity. That is the fundamental revelation or discovery or invention, I guess is more accurate, of Bitcoin. It was a way to create digital scarcity. And before Bitcoin, that was an oxymoron, right? Napster showed us that, what do you mean digital scarcity? I can make 1 million copies. And then you have, workarounds. Apple tries to put DRM and make it so you can't copy. But this technology is, at its heart, is about digital scarcity. And everything kind of follows from that. So I talked a little bit about Bitcoin, how it works. Again, this is super technical. We're not going to get into the weeds. But there are computers known as mining rigs. But they're just computers, and all they're doing is processing transactions. And what they're trying to do, there's a lot of competing computers that are trying to mine the next block, and the block just has a bunch of transactions. And then what you do is you mine that block and you chain it on the block before, and you chain it on the block before, and then you get a chain of blocks, and they call that the blockchain. There are many blockchains out there. Bitcoin is just one of them, but it is the first blockchain. So it's kind of special in that regard, and has some other special properties too. And like I said before, every 10 minutes, the winning miner is going to be the one that actually says, okay, this is the newest block. And they're rewarded for that by through Bitcoin, right? Some newly generated Bitcoin is given to that miner that won that kind of lottery, right? And really what they're doing is they're processing, it's kind of a lottery. Like they're doing a random mathematical calculation that is very, very energy intensive. And the reason why is you need it to be difficult to produce. It would go against that rule of good money if it was just trivially easy for these computers to create new Bitcoin, right? We want it to be hard on purpose because that makes it better money. And then let's see. So each new Bitcoin, they're recorded on that blockchain, that ledger, and then each subsequent transaction is going to get appended to it. So this ledger exists out in the open. Every mining rig and every node has a full copy of this ledger from the beginning of the Bitcoin's existence back in what was 2009 or so. So every transaction that's ever occurred is on this ledger, and it's shared, it's stored, distributed across the world on every computer that's running the Bitcoin software. Okay, I guess we have to pause there for a second. If there's questions, I know that this is like a very complicated topic. If there's just anyone has a question right now, happy to answer it. We can do questions later too. Yeah.
The mining operations and the mathematical problems that they solve have practical value beyond what you just explained?
Yeah, that is a good question. So the question was, these mining rigs, these computers that are dedicated to processing Bitcoin transactions, is there any other practical use case for the computations that they're doing, right? The answer is no, right? I think one analogy might be if like you have excess computing capacity. It used to be cool back in the day where you would like set it to the SETI network where you would like search for extraterrestrial intelligence or protein unfolding, and you're like, your computer's on, you might as well like add it to this network, and maybe some of that computing power can be used for something else. It's not the case in Bitcoin. It's simply just trying to crack that lottery. And so this is where a lot of people would say that, oh, wow, that sounds very wasteful, right? All that processing power and all that energy that it takes and electricity to run that network, it's just going to try to like scratch a lottery ticket, essentially. Like what's the point of that? And why couldn't some of it be used for something else? Great question. The answer is the concept of we need it to be difficult, right? And you want it to, well, from a technical perspective, let's say I have a computer that can process these transactions, and I have another one that can process these transactions and also do something else with it, right? The one that's just purely focused and dedicated on processing these transactions is going to be more likely to quote unquote win, right? Be selected as the winner. So it's kind of like a mini arms race of how fast can I make my computer, how tailored to the Bitcoin algorithm can it be? So you're at a disadvantage if you were to try to like use those resources to do something else. And then the other side of that, well, okay, but I get that, but it's a little wasteful, right? Like it's a lot of electricity going into churning out these transactions, and one person's going to win some Bitcoin and then it's going to start all over 10 minutes later. And like all of that work will have been wasted, right? So the idea there is the name of the consensus algorithm. Remember the word, it was a consensus network. So the consensus algorithm is called proof of work. And the idea there is that we want it to be difficult to produce new units of this Bitcoin on purpose, right? If it was just as simple as like right click save, I make a new copy of it, that wouldn't be very good. So the other extreme of that is we're going to make this very computationally intensive to make a new Bitcoin. And that does a couple things. One, it prevents fake Bitcoin from being made. It also makes sure that that network is very, very, very secure. Because if it was simple to make a Bitcoin, then anyone who wanted to take down the network, maybe it's another government, maybe it's a competing, who knows what, then all they would have to do is, we can spin up some of these servers and it doesn't actually take a lot of energy. And instead I can actually like take down the network or make fake Bitcoin or process fake transactions. So when you make it very, very, very difficult, it actually adds security to the network. So ultimately the answer is it's not wasted. It actually is going into making the network more secure. So what is the value of that? That's a debate, right? How valuable is security? Well, if you're talking about money, that might be the only thing you really, really, really care about, right? I need this thing to be the most secure thing ever. Otherwise, it will not be good money. So great question. I know I only scratched the surface on like answering it, but it is an important topic and it is at the crux of like why it's important. And when someone says, okay, it wastes a lot of energy, to me, it's important to acknowledge that yes, it uses a lot of energy, but I wouldn't say it's wasted. I would say it's actually used to enhance the security of the network. And that is an important use case. And then of course you could just be glib and say, well, wasted energy. Well, every single person heating their pool or their hot tub or running Christmas lights or whatever, like I think that's wasted energy, right? And then it just becomes like a value judgment, right? Is it important to keep, your lights on at night or whatever? I don't know, right? But if I'm buying energy and I get to choose how to use my electricity, then you're choosing to use it the way you want to use it, right? But again, another conversation, but great question. Thank you for that. Yes.
I'm sorry, I came a little bit late.
Yeah. Sorry.
What's
Yeah.
the initial transaction that takes place? The new reported transaction.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the question was, what is the actual transaction we're talking about? And I definitely just skipped over that. You're right. So the analogy would be like, let's say I'm going to actually, how does it work? How do I pay someone in Bitcoin or how do I send it, right? With dollars, it makes sense. I go to Fred Meyer, I hand them a dollar bill. With Bitcoin, it's software essentially. So there's a lot of different wallets or online hosted wallets, exchanges, various things like that, where you can buy Bitcoin and they actually have the ability to send it to someone. It's very similar to like sending an email. So you need their address, right? So you ask the person, hey, merchant or whatever, I want to buy something from you. I want to pay you in Bitcoin. What is your address? So they'll send you an address. It'll be like a long string of indecipherable letters, numbers. It'll look like a crazy string of text. Yes, that's the Bitcoin address, and you will send your Bitcoin to that address. And it's kind of like sending someone an email, right? How do you send an email? Well, that's a technical question. I just go into Gmail and I hit send and it works, right? And so again, that's a bigger technological like discussion of like how it actually works. But at a high level, what it will do is you'll say, I want to send my Bitcoin to this person. They will give you your address. You plug in the address. You'll say the amount. You'll hit send. That request will then be sent to the network. And all these miners that are trying to win this lottery to process the next block, it's kind of queued up. And whichever miner like wins that race is going to take your transaction with a bunch of other transactions, bash them together, put it in a block, and say, okay, now after this block occurs, this is the new state of the ledger. My coins have been sent to this person. I no longer have them. This person has them. And that's important because then we know that I can't then 10 minutes later try to send them to someone else. Which would be double spending, which would be really bad, right? So yeah, hope that answered your question. Yeah.
So it generally takes up to 10 minutes, so 5 minutes on average for the transaction to go through.
Yeah, it's about 10 minutes is the average block time. And so sometimes a little more, sometimes it's a little less. There are other blockchains out there that are trying to go much faster, but Bitcoin is kind of we're just going to do 10. We're going to keep it simple. That's it. Yeah.
And this is used to purchase something.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a security factor involved that controls the actual exchange that's involved in the transaction, the product for the book for the Bitcoin?
Yes. So this is actually a very fascinating question. So the question was the transaction itself. So if I'm going to buy something from it, how does the actual transaction work, right? Fred Meyer, it's understood. I go and I'm buying this loaf of bread. I keep the bread, they keep the dollar, right? If you're in an online world, how does that work, right? You plug in your credit card number, you order from Amazon, they send you the goods and they charge your credit card. Now, say you're in a world where I'm buying something with Bitcoin. How does it work? Well, usually the way it works is the merchant will give you your address. You'll send the Bitcoin to them. They'll wait to see it's confirmed. So they might wait 10 minutes and then they'll send you the product. There's some nuance there because Bitcoin, part of it, it's irreversible. It's a one-way function. So once you send it, there's no way to pull it back, right?
So it doesn't have any controls like a purchase on Amazon.
That's right. That's right. That is
settling a dispute or something.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can.
It's just a done deal transaction.
Right. You can think of it as like.
You got to be very careful that you might do this.
Correct. You're absolutely right. You can think of it as like digital cash, right? If I'm going to the market and I give someone $10 and I get my goods and I come home and I realize, wait a minute, this isn't what I paid for, and the guy's long gone. You're in a kind of a similar situation, right? Except here it might be someone on the other side of the globe, right? So that is a problem. Merchants like it because you can't do chargebacks, right? It's just one way. They get the money. They can't get it pulled back like you can with a normal credit card. But you do have the other that trust issue on the other side of it, right? How do I know I'm getting my goods, right? Then maybe reputational guarantees come in. If it's for a lot of money, maybe I'll use a third-party escrow service. I mean, there's ways around these problems. But you're right. It is like digital cash, right? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But that is a good point. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah.
The lottery.
Yes.
Is it like a normal lottery? People pay to not get involved?
Well,
to get the ticket to wins, and is that how it's funded?
No, well, it's the lottery is more of just the analogy. It's literally like you're having a computer run some software, and that computer is trying to calculate, basically solve an equation with basically throwing random numbers at it.
They win just the chance to keep the ledger?
Yes.
No.
Why?
But because they get a reward. They get a reward, right? So if you win,
the reward is a Bitcoin for
yes,
keeping track of everything.
exactly. Yeah.
So in a way, it's
Yeah. So the miners are
in a way,
incentivized.
that's how it's funded.
Yes, that is how it's funded. Yeah. Yeah.
But they don't keep the ledger.
They keep a copy of the ledger.
But there's not one the ledger.
Well, there is one. It's on every computer, so it's distributed, right? There is one version of it. It's just everyone has a copy.
But the latest person to win the lottery is the one that has the.
They're the ones who say, okay, this is the official block, and then everyone else was, okay, we agree, and now we move on to the next one. Yeah, I don't want to get bogged down in like too much technical, but we can go into that later if there's more time. So anyways, let's do the exercise where we apply, okay, our concept of what is good money to Bitcoin, right? Is it fungible? Yeah, all Bitcoin units are interchangeable. One Bitcoin is no better than the other. I have an asterisk there because, you know, some people think that there is the concept of a tainted Bitcoin. If it came from a drug dealer and somebody knows about it, maybe there's some taint involved there. Kind of the similar thing. If you got a dollar bill that had an ink blotch on it and was part of a bank robbery, is that dollar bill fungible anymore? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But generally, they are fungible. Durable, yes, they're digital. You can use it infinite times. Nothing will happen to it. Divisible, this one's cool. You can actually divide a Bitcoin into 8 decimal places. So 100 millionths of one Bitcoin is the smallest unit, which is very, very, very small. One day, if Bitcoin becomes worth a lot of money, then that unit might be practical. Today, not so much. Portable, amazingly portable. You can have it on a flash drive. You could have it on all sorts of versions of wallets. And since it's digital, you could hold $1 or $10 million in the same flash drive. Now, you can't do something like that with gold or cash or anything like that. $1 of gold, $100 million of gold, very, very different. Identifiable. Yes, most people who know Bitcoin know what it is. Now, some people never heard about it, whatever. Then you have the concept of how do I know someone's giving me good Bitcoin? And there it's like, yes, that you would have to rely on some sort of software product, like a wallet or whatever, that would recognize, yes, this person is sending me good Bitcoin. Acceptable. Yeah, it's accepted globally. It's an international thing. Now, I can't go to Starbucks and buy coffee with it, so that's a little problematic. But if I'm traveling to another country, there's exchanges and Bitcoin exchanges in every country in the world just about. So I can go there and maybe swap it for the local currency if you need to transact that way. But yes, it's accepted globally. Uniform, yeah, one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin. They're all the same. And constrained supply. So this is the interesting part where there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin ever. That's hard coded in the Bitcoin software. So that is extremely constrained supply. So when you compare it with other types of money, gold, other things, if the price of gold goes up, now people are like, oh, okay, I'm going to go mine some more. You can't do that with Bitcoin. I know we have a concept of mining. We call it mining, but really what they're doing is they're validating transactions. But once all the Bitcoin are mined, no more will be made. And I think that's going to happen in 2100 or something like that. No one watching this needs to worry about that necessarily. Probably won't be around, but yes, there eventually will be no more Bitcoin. Usually the question after that is, well, then if they can't generate new Bitcoin, how are the miners incentivized to actually verify new blocks? The answer is that there is transaction fees. So if I'm sending Bitcoin, there's a small transaction fee. And the idea is that at that point, hopefully the transaction fee will cover the miner's expenses. We don't know. It is an open question mark, but not something we really need to worry about today. So I'm just going to briefly touch on the kind of concept of Torah and money. Rabbi Rimmer will go in more in depth. But I found some interesting quotes. Most of them are around fair dealing and weights and measures, right? You should not steal. You should not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You should not falsify measures of length, weight, or capacity. And you should have an honest balance, honest weights, honest, I don't even know how do I pronounce that, but, and honest, well, what that is dry measure and honest liquid measure. So back in the day, the time before they even had coinage, right? Money was more of a barter economy. There were commodities, people used gold and silver, but they weighed it out, physically weighed it out. And so the idea there is you need to have honest weights and measures, meaning you're dealing with this person, you're going to use the same weight. So we're not cheating anyone, right? That's what this is about. It becomes more important. I mean, we can kind of, from there, we can extrapolate where you should just be honest in your dealings, right? You quote someone, you're actually going to give them what you say you're going to give them. We're going to go more in depth in the second part, but that's kind of an interesting concept. And then from there, I want to talk about quickly just what does it mean if something, is this a moral thing? What would it mean to be immoral, right? And I'm setting aside, I'm talking about the monetary system, the money itself, not what people do with the money or how they get money. We can always think of like immoral ways of getting money and spending money. That's not what this is about. It's the system. It's the system itself, right? And so when I think of an immorality of a monetary system, three things jumped out at me. The first one is inflation, otherwise known as seniorage or debasement. The next one is seizability or censorable. So the first one, it's been in the news, you can't avoid it. What is it? It's a general increase in prices and fall in the purchasing value of your money. The dollar bill you had a year ago was more valuable than the dollar bill you have today. Seizable, what does that mean? So can it be seized? Can it be taken from you, especially by government authorities? And censorable, is it subject to censorship, right? I want to give my money to this person. Can I freely do it? Or is someone going to stop me from doing that? So love this quote from Yogi Berra: "A nickel ain't worth a dime anymore." And, you know, inflation, we've been living with this as a people for a long time now. The fiat system, there's some mechanisms underlying it which actually encourage inflation. Some people will tell you just a little bit of inflation is good, it spurs spending, but if you get too much, then it devalues your savings. So this is a chart from the Federal Reserve showing the purchasing power of a dollar. I think it goes back to like 1900 or so. And you can see, you know, over time, the purchasing power has fallen. That is inflation. Now, it's not all bad because there are other things that are deflationary, I think notably like technology, right? The computer I'm using right now, first of all, didn't exist when this chart started, but certainly like the computing power in this computer 10 years ago would have been an order of magnitude more expensive. So prices of things can go down even if overall your purchasing power is going down. So it's not always bad, right? So this is the concept of seizable, right? Do you own the money in your bank account? What does it mean to own it? So these are just headlines I found all from, you know, the past year or so. This is really more of an issue, thankfully, in other countries, right? Nigeria, you're a protester, freezing your bank account. Argentina, they've had a long history of every 10 years or so getting their accounts frozen, all sorts of things. Canada, Freedom Convoy, politics aside, whatever you think, if they're right or wrong, whatever, they froze their bank accounts. Not your money, can't use it. And then, of course, this is you know, important to everyone listening now. I mean, this is not new, right? The Nazis did this to the Jews back in the 30s, where they seize your assets. So that's a real problem. You can be the richest person in the world, and if the government freezes your bank account, what are you now, right? I mean, and you're seeing this with the oligarchs in Russia, right? You're a billionaire. Well, are you a billionaire if you don't have your money anymore? I don't know. And then the idea is, can you use your money as you please, right? So now, you know, you see these headlines, cannabis companies, they're cut out of a lot of financial infrastructure. WikiLeaks, again, judgments aside, they got cut off from payment rails. PayPal, there's stories of them, you know, I think this had to do with some sort of like erotic fiction or something. And they're saying, no, we don't want to let, you know, we don't like that. We're going to censor it, right? And so it's that concept of, is it your money if the person you're saying, please send this money to this person, and they say, no, not going to send it. That's a problem. And so really this, to put all together, the idea is that, okay, there's great parts about our existing monetary system. Everyone who's listening to this is what I would call financially privileged. You're transacting in US dollars, you probably have multiple bank accounts. If you wanted to in a day, you could open up a brokerage account, start trading stocks, and do all these wonderful things. We are privileged. Most people in the world don't have access to the financial system that we have. And I find that this is probably the biggest hurdle to explaining Bitcoin to Americans. I'll extend it to, you know, North Americans, Europeans, whatever. We're privileged, right? If you are in a country that has, shall we say, a less honest government, Nigeria, Venezuela, Lebanon, there's examples that are in the headlines right now. This is a problem for you. You can't trust your bank. You can't trust anything. You can't trust your money. You can't trust your government going to keep your money not inflated away, right? Again, we're dealing with it now a little bit, but other countries, this is routine, right? Zimbabwe, if you Google Zimbabwe banknotes, you know, they have a $1 trillion banknote, and it's crazy, right? So this is this quote. This is Alex Gladstein. He's actually wrote a book about this. It's out now. It's called Check Your Financial Privilege. And I'll just read the quote for you. Anyone with access to the internet can now participate in Bitcoin, a new money system with equal rules for all participants, running on a network that does not censor or discriminate, used by individuals who do not need to show a passport or an ID, and held by citizens in a way that is hard to confiscate and impossible to debase. And so, going back to the Nazi Germany scenario, folks then, they fled with whatever they could carry, right? Maybe it's some candlesticks of value, maybe it's some gold coins if they were lucky, but anything held in a bank account or an institution or anything like that, they couldn't. And so now you have a tool, a way to store your wealth on your person. You are sovereign. This is a Swiss bank account in your pocket. You can take it across borders, and it's light as a feather, right? This isn't like I'm lugging gold with me.
As long as you have a computer and internet.
Sure.
So I bring that up because under the rules with the checks, it's good money or not.
Yeah.
So that brings up the idea that on the other hand, gold you could basically carry. So if
Yeah.
your computer, if an EMV, whatever it's called, goes up over America and loses, every 0 and 1 is white. So it was that.
Yeah.
And the last point was that easy to carry. The government idea would be most people don't store it on a wallet. Most people store it in Gemini.
That's true. Yeah.
The government will have control.
That is true. These are all great points. So the idea, so I'll start with the last one, the idea of like, is it your money? So yes, if you leave your money on an exchange or a hosted wallet, you run into the same issues. If the government wants to take that money from you, they'll call up that exchange and be like, here's a warrant, seize that account. And they can totally do that. But the difference is I can actually hopefully before that would happen, right? You can take your money and you can hold it yourself. You can hold it in a physical wallet. It might be an electronic version. It can be a paper version. There are paper wallets that are secured by a passphrase of 12 or 24 words. And in fact, you could just memorize those words, walk across the border with all your net worth in your head, and there's nothing for them to seize. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but it's possible. And in fact, there's stories coming out of Ukraine now where there are folks, usually they're kind of the creative types who work in the internet, whatever, where they escaped, and the only funds they were able to escape with were Bitcoin and some Ethereum and NFTs and things like that, just because they had them on their person. And the banks were closed, ATMs out of cash. What do? Well, those are the lucky ones. But this is a technology that will allow. I think it really is useful for human rights. If you think human rights, that there's a financial component to human rights, then Bitcoin is a tool for human rights.
It can also be used by criminals.
Sure. So this is thank you. So the question, the comment was, well, boy, a Bitcoin can be used by criminals. Absolutely true. So can everything else, right? A hammer can be used to hammer in a nail, or it can be used to hurt someone, right? It's technology, and so all technology can be used for good or bad. But it's neutral in and of itself, right? And so if you want to get into it, it actually, by far and away, most criminal activity is conducted using the US dollar, by far and away. And actually, what's interesting is a lot of people think that Bitcoin is private. It's not quite private. In fact, it's completely open. It's an open ledger. Anyone can download it, and you'll have the ledger throughout time. What it is it's somewhat anonymous. So if you know what you're doing, you can kind of hide your tracks in a sense. But it actually is a tool for law enforcement. They've actually cracked rings of criminals, because if the criminals don't know what they're doing, you've got a permanent record of everything they've done, right? The second you can attach them to a wallet, you can kind of go back and say, oh, it came from this person, came from this person, whatever. Again, there are ways of getting around that, but it does take some sophistication. So believe it or not, law enforcement, they love Bitcoin. It's great. Yeah.
So I think I read that El Salvador was going to adopt Bitcoin as
Yes.
national currency. What does that mean if a country does that? And are there any other countries that are considering it?
Yeah, that is a good question. They did, in fact, adopt it as their national currency. I don't think it's their exclusive national currency. I think they still have their local, I don't know what it is, a peso or something. But I think for that means that you can pay your taxes in it. Every government agency is forced to accept it. And so there you get back to this concept of, from the beginning of is it a medium of exchange? Well, they're saying, yes, if it's for government purposes, it has to be a medium of exchange. So you're kind of like chipping away at that. Oh, well, Bitcoin doesn't do any of these things. Well, now it does, right? Or it can. I don't know what the other part of your question was. Are other countries
Considering it.
Yeah, so it is worth noting that El Salvador is a small country, relatively poor country, not a lot of people there. So it's not a huge deal that they adopted it as the national currency. I think it's a step in an amazing step in the direction. And if I'm guessing, I think central banks are going to start having Bitcoin on their balance sheet, because why wouldn't you? Even if you're wrong, if there's a 1% chance of this taking off and actually being a reserve currency of the world, you'd be crazy not to. Then are other countries doing it? I think so. I don't know for sure. I don't have any inside knowledge, but people on Twitter think Guatemala and some of these other Central American countries might be next. I don't know. We'll see. Yes, another question.
How would widespread adoption of Bitcoin affect the place of the United States in the global economic scheme of things?
Yes, also fascinating question. So everyone in the United States, part of our monetary privilege is that we transact in the reserve currency of the world. That's great, right? We can go anywhere in the world and they're going to accept our dollars, right? People love our dollars. That is not true for most currencies in the world. And in fact, we kind of like solidified that in place by having a lot of the oil exporters force them to price oil in dollars. So you want to buy oil in the world market, you actually have to go out and get dollars, right? So what does that mean if that were to change, if the US dollar ceased to be the reserve currency of the world? Could it be supplanted by something else? Could even Bitcoin supplant that? It's possible. I think we're probably moving into a more multipolar world. I don't know if US dollar is going to lose reserve currency status anytime soon, because then it begs the question, what do you replace it with? The Chinese currency? Well, there's lots of things wrong with that. The euro? I don't know. Maybe a basket of currencies? Maybe something backed by commodities also. That probably would make a lot of sense. And what's cool about Bitcoin is what you're seeing with what happened to Russia recently, when they built up a giant amount of foreign exchange reserves, $600 billion, whatever. They're like, we're getting ready to do some invading, right? And then what happened? Well, the Western countries said, yeah, all that money that you thought was yours, we're going to cut off access to that. That was a little scary moment for, I think, countries, I don't know, you can call them non-aligned countries or non-Western countries or whatever. And they're like, well, wait a minute. If the US and their European allies don't like what we're doing, are they going to cut off our funds, our reserve assets? Well, that's scary. Well, yes, you could store gold, you could hoard gold, but there's problems with that. Logistically, it's complicated, it's heavy, you got to secure it, whatever. Well, geez, now there's a new technology called Bitcoin that is uncensorable, unseizable, and we can start accumulating it ourselves. So I think for a variety of reasons, you're going to see countries start to accumulate it. Yeah.
I'll ask the question a second time.
Yeah.
How would widespread adoption of Bitcoin affect America's position globally from an economic perspective? Would it weaken our position?
So,
Would it
okay.
make it harder for us to compete or easier for other countries to compete with us? How would it affect us internally?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, your question is a bit more nuanced than what I answered. It is a good question. So assuming there's widespread adoption of Bitcoin, how would that affect the US standing in the world economically, whatnot, right? Well, it kind of depends on like, are we encouraging it or does this happen against our will, right? And I think if you go back to the expansion of the internet, right? The US Congress in their wisdom at the time said, wow, this technology has a lot of potential. We want to make sure it gets developed here in this country. And it was a brilliant move. And if you see the market caps of the most valuable companies in the world, most of them are technology companies. Most of them are based in the United States, right? So what does that mean for something like Bitcoin? Well, if the US government were to embrace it, or at least just not get in its way, just let it happen like they did with the internet, right? A lot of wealth, a lot of value is going to be created using this technology. Let's have it be created here. Let's capture that value. And then you see other countries like take a more strict stance, like China, for example. They started banning miners, right? Because a lot of people were using cheap energy there to mine Bitcoin. And they said, nope, we don't want this, right? We're going to cut this off. They kicked all the miners out of China. And that used to be a big knock against Bitcoin. Oh, well, it's all mined in China. We can't trust them. What if the Chinese government takes it over? Well, they said no mining Bitcoin in the country. And so most of it left. A lot of it went to the United States. And so there's big mining companies in Texas using excess energy. They're getting quite creative, right? Because all you want is abundant and cheap energy. It actually spurs the race for renewables. And then random things like flare gassing. I don't know if anyone's like an oil expert or whatever. But when you're taking oil, hydrocarbons out of the ground, there's a lot that's just goes into the atmosphere, methane gas, really bad. So now what these guys do is they put a mining rig on top of that, they burn it at that point, and then mine Bitcoin from it. And so when you think about it, you take a step back and you're like, well, what is Bitcoin really? It's backed. What is it backed by? Well, nothing except maybe we believe in it, but it actually is backed by something. It's backed by a network that consumes a lot of electricity and is very saleable. So if people are going to accept this, right? And I'm a utility company and I'm doing, okay, I'm generating all this electricity. A bunch of it's going to waste, right? Well, instead of it going to waste, I'm going to mine some Bitcoin. And that way I can actually be much more efficient in my operations. So I think if you look at it from like, oh, it's going to compete with the US dollar, it's going to compete with the US government. I understand from a policy perspective why you might be enticed to do that. I think that would be the wrong move. I personally would embrace it and do it legally, right? I mean, if the concern is like, oh, like the criminals and the terrorists, like we have a really robust anti-money laundering laws to prevent all that stuff. And it's going to be hard for folks, frankly, to use Bitcoin to get around it. It's possible, but it's going to be difficult. So a lot of people say, oh, well, Vladimir Putin's going to use Bitcoin to get around sanctions. Well, like the amount of money that he would need to transact in, like the Bitcoin network is too immature right now to handle that. And so if he were to try to use it, it would be so obvious that he's using it that it would basically, he wouldn't fool anyone, right? You'd be like, wow, he's sending money to this. Like you wouldn't, oh, let's accept that it's Bitcoin. No, we know where it's coming from, right? So it is traceable. It's not fully anonymous. So we'll see is the answer. But for all the policy folks out there, for anyone who has people's ear in Washington, you should embrace it. I think it's an opportunity. Yeah. Okay. I think we're at time here. We'll probably have some time for questions at the end. Yeah.